Senator Bernie Sanders held his first rally this weekend as a second-time presidential contender. He kicked off his campaign in front of a large crowd in Brooklyn, New York. He told stories about growing up in the borough and laid out his vision for the campaign ahead.
At our very first rally, I want to welcome you to a campaign which says loudly and clearly that the underlying principles of our government will not be greed, hatred, and lies.
Meanwhile, another candidate entered the race with a more moderate agenda. John Hickenlooper is a two-term governor from Colorado. He formally announced his 2020 bid Monday. In his announcement, Hickenlooper said, "I'm running for president because we need dreamers in Washington, but we also need to get things done." To discuss this, let's bring in CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Antjuan Seawright. He's a Democratic strategist and the CEO of Blueprint Strategy. Welcome to all of you. Ed, let me start with you. John Hickenlooper is joining a growing field of Democrats. Do we know yet what sets him apart, or is it too early to tell at this point?
Well, for one thing, he's another governor. We had one last week, Jay Inslee of Washington State join in. Hickenlooper's just most recently was governor of Colorado, and his term ended there at the beginning of the year. But he also is someone who sort of comes out of a more moderate, pragmatic wing of the Democratic Party than a lot of these other contenders who are already in. And so he will attempt to distinguish himself. If you're someone who's looking at all this through the sort of lens of lanes, he's somebody who's going to try to fill that executive lane, a more moderate or centrist lane, and for lack of a better description, the white guy lane. He won't be the only white guy in the race. There's a few more we still expect to announce in the coming days. But certainly will cast himself as someone not nearly as liberal as someone like Bernie Sanders or Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren on some of these issues, and somebody who really believes that his kind of executive experience as a mayor of Denver and a governor of Colorado could work here in Washington. It's
interesting, Antjuan, with this sort of moderate approach, he's coming at a time when you have a lot of progressive ideals. Medicare for all, the Green New Ideal, those are things that seem to be becoming talking points this election. Is it a winning strategy to try and run on a moderate platform, Antjuan?
Of course it is, because I think the biggest thing for voters in the Democratic primary, particularly the most loyal voting bloc, African-American voters, is authenticity, genuineness, and honesty. And the minute any candidate runs away from who they truly are, I think the minute they will have long-term problems in this marathon of a race we call the Democratic primary. And so I say to the governor of Colorado, do not be afraid of who you are and the record you have brought you to where you are. And I think that will take you further down the road than trying to really put makeup on to be something you're not.
So, Caitlin, there's another moderate from Colorado weighing a presidential run. What do we know about Senator Michael Bennet?
Well, Michael Bennet actually used to work for Governor Hickenlooper, so there's that connection there. But there's this question about, is there room for two guys from Colorado? And the answer seems to be sure, why not? If we've learned anything from this field so far, nobody has been successful at clearing it out. Not even the prospect of Joe Biden getting into the race is causing anybody to give second thoughts, really, as to whether to jump in. So you have Michael Bennet, who has been out there in Iowa meeting with some people and kind of really genuinely testing the waters to see, first of all, is there a constituency for me? And second of all, do I actually like this sort of thing? I mean, the campaigning for president is very different than campaigning for any other kind of office. So you could have as big of a field as we have, with some crossovers, with some members from the same state, and that just shows how the Democrats are kind of feeling, why not me and why not now?
If you have, though, Hickenlooper now in, if you're Michael Bennet, what are you thinking?
Well, I mean, you're thinking about where is my lane or where's my niche. Michael Bennet is a more moderate member of the Senate, but he also has a credential as a senator. He can point to legislation that he has sponsored or passed or cared about. He can point to his work in the Senate, and he can also, see if there is room to differentiate himself from someone like Hickenlooper. It could be a tall order, but again, there is this question of why should I not at least consider consider it, is what a lot of Democrats are thinking.
Yeah, a lot of them. Well, a recent poll by the Wall Street Journal asked registered voters how comfortable they'd be backing a candidate who has socialist qualities. 25% said they would be comfortable. So, Ed, how are we seeing this idea of socialism play out in the 2020 debate?
I think this is a good reminder, Elaine, that, while there's been a lot of talk about these kinds of positions, and it's sort of had a bit of a renaissance, the theory, the idea, and the debate over it and its merits, socialism is not going to transcend well in a general election. And I think if you're somebody who's more concerned about who can defeat Trump, you look at a number like this, especially if it repeats itself in future polling in the coming months and year, and ask yourself, does that number move at all? Does it go up? If it doesn't, then that's a knock potentially on those who are espousing some of those viewpoints. That would be somebody, most especially like Bernie Sanders, who calls himself a democratic socialist, but talks quite openly and with some fondness for socialism, and has rooted a lot of his political career in that. So, it's a good reminder that while there will be ideological debates among Democrats about how far to the left should we go on issues, do we have to skew to the center to try to win over the rest of the country, those kinds of numbers I think are going to stand out. The other one I found really fascinating in that poll from over the weekend, the growing percentage of acceptance of the possibility of a gay or lesbian presidential candidate went from something like 43%, I believe it was, back in 2006, to now in the high 60s in 2019, a sign that, at least on that issue, or that attribute of a potential candidate, it's not necessarily a barrier to entry as it might have been perceived as being in the past. Pete Buttigieg, of course, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, the first openly gay man to run for the presidency. He's got to look at that number and think that's kind of interesting. And remember, this is a poll of all Americans. It wasn't just Democrats. And I think it's telling that kind of acceptance is now there for that group of people. No surprise that African American or a white man are seen as most acceptable by the largest percentage of voters, but to see that cross into the top four, I think is kind of interesting.
That is interesting, considering, as you said, in 2006, the number was, 20 points lower back in 2006. But Caitlin, I want to go back to Senator Bernie Sanders, because as we mentioned, he kicked off his campaign in Brooklyn. And I wonder, is he doing anything differently this time around? If so, what are we seeing so far?
Well, first of all, kicking his campaign off in Brooklyn is something different. It is a sign that the campaign and that the candidate feels like he needs to really talk more about himself and his biography and his own roots. In 2016, this was about creating a movement of people, and now he has to build upon that, but also kind of differentiate himself a little bit from some of these other candidates. The campaign is also focused on a diverse staff, or a more diverse staff than they had in 2016, and he has actually parted ways with some of his former top advisors. So there are some fundamental changes in the campaign, but a lot of the themes are very similar, and the pitch is that he was the one who got these kinds of ideas into the mainstream of the party, and he feels like he is the one who should be able to kind of close the deal and move the ball forward. He's raised a lot of money, $10 million in his first week, and if you look at the crowd sizes that he was getting, not only in Brooklyn but also in Chicago, 12,000 people, it's a lot. It shows at least that there is enthusiasm for his campaign at this stage. The question is, can he sustain it? And do those people who were with him, do they start looking elsewhere as they get to know more of these candidates?
So Senator Sanders and other 2020 candidates were in Selma, Alabama this weekend. Hillary Clinton was honored for her work with voting rights, and I want to play some of what she said.
This is a time, my friends, when fundamental rights, civic virtue, freedom of the press, the rule of law, truth, facts, and reason are under assault. And make no mistake, we are living through a full-fledged crisis in our democracy.
So, Antjuan, I know you were in Selma on Sunday. Can you talk to us about the energy you saw on the ground and the implications here for 2020?
Well, it was special for me. As you may or may not know, my uncle is the AME bishop in the state of Alabama, the 9th Episcopal District, so his office was in charge of planning most of the events that happened this weekend, so I had a very personal touch to the events. But I worked for Hillary Clinton twice, and the speech that she gave in Brown Chapel AME Sunday morning was arguably the best speech I've ever seen her give, because it was not scripted, she was not peeping at notes, but she talked about all the things that we know are going wrong in this country. And I've said it a different way and say that we are in a battle for America's soul and we cannot afford to lose. And I think she said that her own way. But I think the thing that she said the most important that stuck out to me the most was, we can talk about health care, we can talk about education, we can talk about all these issues, but if we do not get voting rights right in this country, we're going to have long-term problems. And that's what Selma was all about. John Lewis and his crew and many others, they marched so that African Americans could have this access to the thing called the ballot box. And so she hit it head on, and it's no secret in this country that our voting rights are under assault, particularly for people of color. And she mentioned Stacey Abrams. She mentioned Wisconsin, places where her race was impacted because people of color were kicked off the rolls. And so that was so important. But I think the larger notion for 2020 candidates and Selma this weekend is that if there's one thing we all have in common, we all may disagree on how we deal with health care, education, student loan reform, voting rights should be the #1 issue for all of our 2020 Democratic candidates this cycle.
Antjuan, before we let you go, I want to ask you about something that has gotten some attention, though. After her speech, Hillary Clinton hugged Cory Booker and Sherrod Brown, notably gave Senator Sanders only a quick handshake. Is there anything to be read into that, and if so, what?
I don't think Secretary Clinton was throwing shade at Bernie Sanders. Look, I think the one thing she knows I think the one thing we all know about Secretary Clinton is she knows how to block and tackle, and she knows that this is a contact sport. And so that Bernie Sanders' advice or not seeking her advice, I don't think hurt her, but I think it hurt him more than anything, because Hillary Clinton still enjoys very much a lot of popularity in our party, and we saw that this weekend. And if Bernie Sanders would have walked into Brown Chapel and got the applause that Hillary Clinton would have got, we could possibly just cancel the Democratic primary.
Ed, you want to weigh in?
All I know, Elaine, is that in Alabama and South Carolina, Antjuan is royalty. So if you're heading there, you go with him. That's all I know.
Okay. And on that note, Ed O'Keefe, Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Antjuan Seawright, thanks to you all. Really appreciate it.